Hi listeners, Jason here. We are excited to finally announce registrations for the biggest psych health and safety community event ever. The inaugural The Psych Health and Safety Conference will be held at the Sofitel Wentworth, Sydney, June 19 to 20, 2024, and offer concurrent virtual attendance. It'll feature live podcast recordings with OG researchers including Christina Maslach and Michael Leiter of Burnout fame, Psych Health and Safety USA podcast host I. David Daniels, Australian super experts including the likes of David Burrows, a special 10-year anniversary integrated approaches to workplace mental health panel with authors Tony LaMontagne, Angela Martin and Kat Page, hand-picked case studies from organisations doing it well, and a very special interview with plaintiff Zaggy Kozarov by Catherine Dunlop on that High Court case which we previously covered on the podcast. This event will sell out. Get in quick to secure tickets at early bird prices for the 2-day conference, pre-conference masterclasses, and the VIP dinner. The first 200 in-person registrations also get a copy of her latest book, The Burnout Challenge, signed by Christina Maslach herself. Find out more and register at www.psychhealthandsafetyconference.com. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Peter Kelly. I'm your host for today, and I'm going to allow my guest to introduce herself, and then we're going to have a really great chat. This is definitely a podcast I've been looking forward to doing ever since we met in New York in the Momo.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm Jodie Hill. I'm the founder and managing partner of Thrive Law. And basically what we do is employment law, but with a difference, putting people first. And my specialism is employment law, but also with training, wellbeing, diversity and inclusion. So really very much about people, psychological safety and looking at preventative measures.
Awesome. And a whole lot more.
Probably. It's always funny when you have to introduce yourself.
I know, particularly when you know somebody already. It was interesting, wasn't it, Jodie? We were going to do this podcast a few days ago. And I met you in the office, and I know we talked about this, and it was actually on that day. I think we had to be real, didn't we? I think that's really, really. I mean, it's a really useful start to what we're going to be really talking about, which is, you have a lived experience, don't you, in this area as well, which has influenced a lot of what you've done and how you approach it,
Yeah, definitely. So to give people context, when we met the other day, I had therapy in the afternoon, and I have therapy online sometimes. And for the first time in a long time, I got quite emotional in the therapy. And so when I came out of that to see you, I was still a bit emotional, probably hadn't really processed what I'd just gone through. And I suppose to give context even further, about 6 years ago, I had a mental breakdown, and that's why I launched my own law firm. So I still have therapy now, and I'm quite open about talking about that with my team and online, because I think it's important that we normalise those types of conversations. And it was really kind of you, and I felt like I was in a safe space because I could say to you, I've just had therapy, and I was, a bit out of sorts. And I think that's really important in workplaces to be able to say that. And sometimes you have to go, I need to be real now, and I can't do this right now. And that's okay, rather than pushing ourselves through things that might make us feel worse or not allow us to process or not allow us to be ourselves. So thank you, first of all, for that. It is something I'm really passionate about. When I set my firm up, the reason I did that was because I wanted to create a psychologically safe place for me to work. Quite selfishly, I was like, I don't want to have another breakdown. So what do I know from my lived experience? But what do I also know as an employment lawyer in order to create a culture that is mental health and wellbeing focused, rather than it being last on the list in a tick box? So that was kind of the driving force to start with. And then from there, it was about attracting clients who shared those values so I could work with them in a proactive way, but also staff, so that, again, the advice that we're giving, but also the culture that we're creating emanates all of those values, rather than it being just me telling everybody what they have to be like. The culture very much speaks for itself. So now we've got about 20 people working for us across several cities in the UK. So that's quite a proud little moment.
Yeah, not just 20 though, is it, Jodie? You're also best law firm in Yorkshire, isn't it, for the last 3 years? So, which is a terrible indictment when I live in Lancashire. But so occasionally I'll go over to the other side and that. But no, I mean, I think it's really important in that I mean, your backstory, which is really, really sort of interesting, how you've got to where you are. You've taken something which was at the time a really dramatic event, wasn't it? It was life changing.
Yeah.
And you've done exactly that. But it's kind of changed the direction of your life and also the business. So I guess, does it come really naturally just to be a decent boss?
I know what I don't like. So I think because I haven't had any good bosses, I kind of use that as my experience. And I just lead with kindness and empathy and compassion. And I think that often, especially like the legal sector, lacks that. Can be, it is competitive, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a successful business if you're, being kind to people. So does it come naturally? Sometimes, yeah, I think it does come naturally. And sometimes I have to not be too nice. That's also a challenge, is, kind of, for me, I've always struggled with people pleasing. So actually, sometimes for me, it's the other way. Like, I don't struggle to be kind. I actually struggle to be, because I'm too kind, and sometimes do things that actually don't put me in the best position as a boss, because I'm thinking about other people. So for me, what I struggle with is finding the balance there and boundaries. I think that's really challenging when you've been so vulnerable and you've got such close relationships with people.
Do you find it like that the fact that psychological health and safety should just be a normal part of work? Because I mean, some people say, I don't think it's achievable in an office environment, or in a factory environment. What's your take on that? Because I obviously have a very biased view.
Well, of course it's achievable. It's about embedding these values into your culture. If you approach psychological safety as an isolated incident for each person that comes to you because they feel at risk, then you're probably not going to achieve psychological safety. I think if you embed into your culture the importance of talking about mental health, training, all of the stuff that comes with psychological safety, but also knowing that people have somewhere to go if they feel relatively unsafe or they feel like they need support, so that there's decent processes in place for organizations. It's definitely doable. I mean, I feel like we've achieved that at Thrive, and that's not just me saying that. You can speak to any of my team. And actually, when the SRA, our regulatory body, did a thematic review last year on workplace culture, they selected several firms in the UK, and ours was one of them. And what they did was randomly asked our staff about things like psychological safety, and if there's a mistake made, do you feel safe to report that to your boss? And how are you supported? Do you feel that you've got access to the right people, especially the juniors? And they did it all anonymously. So I don't know what they asked my team. I just saw the results. And then we were featured off the back of that for an exemplary workplace culture. And the SRA have now brought out 2 principles that essentially embed that into the regulatory requirements. So you have to make sure that your workplace is positive for wellbeing, and also that it's free from discrimination and bullying and harassment. And I spoke at an event on that last week. So working in this space and being able to affect change, I think, is really important to help other people achieve psychological safety. And people say, well, you can't do it because I'm a small employer, or because I'm an office, or because I'm this. There's a lot of excuses. But, when I set Thrive up, I was 29. I had never had any management experience. And I've had to learn a lot of it very quickly, but I've called upon the right people and the right experts to support me in that growth. And being a type of business or a size of business or lack of experience isn't an excuse, because we can all upskill, we can all make those changes. Often it's just easier to do what we did before, rather than go, actually, this is really important, we need to change. And that's why I think legislative change is probably the way forward to push employers down the right road.
Oh God, now you're speaking my language. What's really interesting, Jodie, is to see that we talk about psychological safety, but what you're creating in your workplace is psychological health, because actually you don't wait until someone's ill, do you? You look ahead of the time and think, well, what's going on? What's happening today? And why is someone behaving in that way? I mean, I'd really like your insight on that, because as you're there as the boss, the buck ends with you, doesn't it, so to speak? But actually, it's the people, it's the things and the people around you that look out for each other. Not when they're depressed, but it's everything that goes before. So.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why I'm really keen to push businesses towards a more data-driven approach, because we can do lots of things in businesses that are nice. We can do free fruit and yoga, and we can do all the wellness stuff, but that's wellness, and that's great if that's what your staff actually need. But how do we know that that's what our staff need? How do we know that that improves well-being? How do we know that that makes them feel psychologically safe? So getting the right data, I think, is really important. And one of the things that we have really found helpful in our business is doing mental health risk assessments throughout the year. So twice a year, gathering the data on all of our well-being, the contributors to stress, do people feel supported, whether they're doing well. So lots of different areas of well-being. So not just looking at a stress risk assessment, but looking at everything. And then analysing that data and going back to the team and going, okay, so this is what the results told us. It's all anonymous in the sense of we don't know which person said what, but we got a percentage. So say, 75% of people struggle with sleep. Then we can go, okay, so people are struggling with sleep. What do we think that we can do to help each other be better here? Do we need to bring in a speaker to educate them? Do we need to talk about sleep hygiene? Do we want to share best practice for those people who do sleep well? And we can look at the trends. So on the sleep example, what we noticed was lots of people also said they were tired. Lots of people were also having caffeine before bed, and people were on the screens before bed. So looking at that whole sleep hygiene, you can just through a workshop with the team and discussing how we could do things better, actually improves people's energy levels, improves their sleep, which in turn improves their mental and physical health. And all of a sudden, you've got this more open environment talking about issues that when would you ever talk about sleep to your boss? You just wouldn't. It just wouldn't come up. So creating that space through the use of data, I found to be really helpful. And then you can then monitor that. So when we do the next one, we can set targets and go, okay, so our energy levels were this. What do we want them to be at? How are we going to achieve that? And then we measure it again in 6 months. So for me, I think that's where this needs to go, to more towards that more tangible, measurable way of looking at well-being and mental health. Because without that, we could literally spend millions of pounds and not know if it works. And that kind of, for me, seems to defeat the point, which is kind of what's happening in a lot of workplaces at the moment.
Exactly. We are spending millions of pounds and not knowing it.
Exactly. Not me personally.
No, but I mean, and my ex-boss used to say that I could fall asleep at the drop of a hat. But you see, it was interesting. His conversation about that led me to go and get a sleep apnea test, and I suffer from sleep apnea. So I wouldn't have known. I mean, he was joking because I literally could fall asleep at the bottom of a hat. Bottom of the hat, I'm not sure if that's right.
Drop of a hat.
And actually, but it was because he noticed stuff, and I went, well, maybe there is something there, And in my case, there was, and actually, the first night I used the sleep apnea machine, I was like, oh my God, that's what sleep feels like. You wake up and you feel refreshed. But it was because he was interested in my psychological and my well-being.
Yeah.
And I think the use of data is so important. And I mean, I know you're the SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authorities. I was just literally on a webinar last week with the International Bar Association, and everything you're saying, you recognise in these firms, and it's solicitors now are identified as a risk factor. The law is. identified as a risk factor.
It doesn't surprise me. I think the challenge with a lot of the legal sector, and not to make this just about lawyers, because I'm sure this applies to other sectors, but the real challenge is the workplace cultures and practices don't match what they're trying to achieve. So an example, a really easy example, is billable hours. You know, if you want someone to bill so many hours per day, that means they're going to have to work over their contractual hours because they aren't factoring in the fact that they might have to do admin, go to the toilet, eat food, talk to their colleagues, socialize, and also, you know, eat basic human rights. But that's a challenge, because then you say to people, well, we've got all of this wellbeing training, go and do this, or, you know, attend this yoga class, or can you attend this neurodiversity training? And people are like, I don't have time because I've got billable hours. I've got to do this. So until businesses make sure that their practices match what their initiatives are trying to achieve, they're not going to see the progress, and they're actually going to, in my view, cause more damage, because people go, what's the point of putting all of this on when you won't let us attend it, or you won't make the space for us to attend it because the practices don't match? So that's, for me, is the biggest challenge in the legal sector. And I'm sure that is very similar in lots of businesses, because it's how they always did it. And so there's this disparity between how we've always done it and the old school way of thinking, and the more progressive, innovative ways of trying to achieve inclusion and, you know, psychological safety. That is not, there's a disparity.
And I think when you look at it, I mean, how many lawyers saying, well, that's just the way we did it around here?
Yeah.
Well, I used to go to business and I'll say, well, this is just the way we can't change. That's the way we do it around here. But you use an event to say, well, actually, there is a different way. There could be a different way. And I mean, I guess that's, you know, as a consequence, you're successful because you put people first in your business. Or would that be like just too far out there? Or is that your belief? Putting your people first makes you a much more better prospect as a law firm.
Yeah.
Or as any firm.
Definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't have a law firm without my staff. So the reality is, if you don't appreciate the value that your staff have, especially in a professional services business where, you know, the staff are the business, you know, essentially they look after my clients. So how I see it is, I don't need to look after my clients per se. If I look after my staff and I take a genuine interest in their well-being and I genuinely care about them, as I do, then that they will look after the clients, they will look after each other. And the feedback that we've had over the last couple of years, because obviously we've been going 5 years now, but particularly the last 18 months, has been that we're in a really good place of achieving that now. And we're developing our own tools where the team are coming up with suggestions. It's not me, it's them driving it. And that for me is just like such a proud moment, because you imagine I set this up having had my own breakdown, and my staff have come to interviews with me and told me in an interview, I had a panic attack on the way here. And they felt they could do that because they'd seen me on the news talk about my PTSD, and they'd never met me before, but they felt comfortable to do that. And now they feel comfortable with each other doing that as well, as more people join. And so it shows that it's not just me and my beliefs now. Actually, it's something that's contagious within Thrive. And that's because I've put them first. So that definitely was hard to start with, because, you know, I'm not in a big city firm with all the resources. I didn't have any investors. I didn't have a dedicated HR person. So you've got all of those things that in a larger organization you can fall back on, that infrastructure. I'm also undiagnosed at the time. I was undiagnosed ADHD. So I was also struggling and heading towards burnout again, because I hadn't realized that was what was happening. So I've had this kind of whole journey, and being able to, for me, creating the safe space for myself has meant that that's been safe for my team, and putting them first was the main way that I did that.
Do you believe openness is the power of leadership?
Yeah, I think so. Openness and vulnerability. I think in order for us to succeed as leaders, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that are working with us, and we have to show an air of vulnerability, because people relate to that. I'm a big believer in that, and probably that's why I talk about it so much online. But I think there's such power in sharing your story, and that's part of the reason why I launched This Is Me in Yorkshire, because giving business, if business leaders share their vulnerability, they are much more likely to have staff that are going to be open with them about their mental health, because there's less stigma attached to the fact that they're struggling, because they see a boss, they see someone successful who's made it, and they're like, well, they struggled and they still made it, so maybe I'll make it. It gives people a sign of hope, and it really helps to tackle stigma. So I do think openness and vulnerability are absolutely crucial in the future of work.
And also, I mean, the vulnerability, particularly after lockdown, and we spoke about this when we met. That actually the way work's being done, the changes, the fact that there's been a seismic shift in people working from home. Sorry, that I do apologise. That's my coffee machine in the background, and hopefully you can't hear it, but it just only goes off once an hour, so we should be all right. Yeah. But there's been a shift in my work done. So I'd be interested from, we're both interested in the law. How useful is the law in this area to bring about change? And with the law being civil law and health and safety law.
Yeah. So, good point, because there isn't really anything in employment law other than requirements to make adjustments and things like that under the Equality Act. But I don't think the Health and Safety Act is particularly helpful in that. Obviously, it does refer to wellbeing, and that is something that employers have to care about. But I feel like there's a lot of secondary legislation and statutory instruments that support businesses on how to do that from a physical perspective, but not so much on the mental health side. And so what I think is needed is legislative change, probably secondary legislation that sets out some guidance and support for employers on how to assess the risk of any of their employees when it comes to wellbeing and mental health, rather than it just being a physical health. Or should I say, rather than being physical health, it's at the top of the agenda. It just seems there's a lot lacking. Now, the HSE have got loads of guidance, but it's guidance, it's not mandatory. So it would be good to see a combination of the HSE guidance with some risk assessments as secondary legislation. And that's something that I'm pushing for with government at the moment, because I think if we can get that change and have an air of consistency and a minimum basic standard that employers have to achieve, that's going to help start those conversations, especially in those organisations that don't know where to start or are getting it wrong.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
What we need, is the use of legislation combined with the secondary legislation. There's a lot of initiatives out there at the moment, though, aren't there, that lack any sort of legal oomph. There's a lot of processes. I mean, how you train your customers. So what are you training them on? Are you just exclusively training them on the law as it relates to mental health, or are you doing a whole range of things?
Yeah, so a whole range of things. When it comes to wellbeing, there's the key areas that I think are important are management trainings and awareness training to start with. So awareness training for all staff, understanding like basic signs of how they might be able to help themselves, self-awareness, self-care. So that's not legal training. That's just how do we be more self-aware and look after each other? How do we have like those more difficult conversations if we spot the signs, that type of thing. And then for managers, like let's be honest, most managers become managers because they're good at their job technically. They're not always people, and that means that they are then responsible for a group of people, and they might not be very good at communicating, or they might have never done a one-to-one, or they don't know what reasonable adjustments are. So I think it's important that managers have a basic management training, and then levels of that are built upon it in terms of like mental health, how to manage. So for example, like how to balance poor performance with mental ill health, how to manage sickness properly when someone's mentally ill, like how to make adjustments. So some of this links in with the law, and because I've got the legal knowledge and the lived experience, what I do is I just make it really practical. So I'm not really talking about this is the law and this is what you need to know. I'm talking practically, this is how you help these human beings in your business be the best that they can be. So it's really focusing on like, how do we get teams to be high performing through effective management, and using the knowledge that I've got as a lawyer, combining that with the lived experience of what I would have liked to have been treated like, and then looking at best practice but is really the focus. And we just build it bespoke for businesses. And the reason for that is we try to understand what the challenges are within the team and the skill gaps, and then we build it from there. So a lot of companies will ask us to do like disciplinary and grievance training, but can you also teach them how to have the difficult conversation? So it's not just the process, it's the how to. So it's very practical and very interactive. So yeah, that's kind of how we approach it. And that's part of our preventative approach to basically stopping discrimination from happening in the workplace. So I know I'm a lawyer and I should just cash in at the end like lawyers do and wait for things to go wrong, but that doesn't seem very ethical to me. So looking at how we can prevent issues from happening in the workplace, which in turn prevent claims and mental ill health, is really important to me.
And I think that I guess that's informed by your own experiences as well, of what you would have wanted things to be done in a certain kind of way, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not just coming at this from this is the process, this is how you have to follow it. We're trying to put the human back in that process and realize that there's a person involved. It's not just, well, the law says this, so do this. It looks at, how can we be as supportive as possible to get the most out of that employee? And look, there are occasions where ultimately the decision is that person has to leave, but it's about making sure we've explored all of those processes and options beforehand, and seeing what we can do in terms of adjustments before those decisions are made. Often employers will jump straight to, well, they're not performing or they were late, therefore, that's straight to a performance management process. Well, is that the right thing to do if somebody's mum's just died and they've had a mental breakdown? Well, probably not. So it's looking at how you might adjust those things and giving people practical examples and cases where it's gone wrong, so that they can really understand how they might be able to deal with that when it happens to them as a manager.
Yeah, because guess what? Managers are human as well.
Exactly. And often they just don't know what to do. It's not from a place of arrogance. It's usually ignorance or lack of education, because they've just been put in a role without the right training. So I think it's incumbent on employers to do something about that.
And that's I guess that's the unique thing about the law. The law shouldn't always be the rescue boat. It should also sometimes be, it should be just throwing you out a lifeboat, a ring, a life ring. Yeah, it should actually be there guiding, people so they don't get in the water in the first place, isn't it? Desmond Tutu says, "Why are you pulling people out of the river, down the river? Why are you not looking why they fell in the river up to the ravine?" I think that. I mean, who's going to question Desmond Tutu? Certainly not me. Which is sort of amazing. Let's talk about our favourite subject, the law, because I can't. Sorry, Jodie, I can't have you on here and not talk about the law, because it's do you think the current state of the law is suitable and sufficient for most claims, e.g., around work-related stress, or do you think we need to have new case law, because the law, if it's Walker versus Northumberland County Council, was 1979. It was 1984, I think. So we still get references in the legal settings, and certainly when I was working as a regulator, to that references right back to then. But there's been so much more that's gone on, has there not?
Yeah, there has, and I think that it is really helpful to have newer case law, because it's so hard when you're referring back to old law. You're just thinking, how relevant is this? Like, our workplace is really the same as this now. And I guess that goes back to why I was saying we need an update on the Health and Safety Act, because obviously that was brought in the 70s, so such a long time ago.
1974.
1974, exactly. So, but it's such a long time ago that workplaces have changed so much since then, and the reality being, the legislation needs updating as workplaces develop. So, for me, it's not necessarily just about having a legislation just for the sake of it. It's about having legislation that really does support the rule of law, does support organisations, but also individuals. So often we see like the legislation might be more employee focused or employer focused, but actually what I'm really hopeful for here is that we can have something that helps both sides equally to achieve psychological safety, rather than it being like, well, if this happens, you can sue them. It's about how can we prevent that and how can we work together. So it's a more collaborative approach using the legislation. I think that would be really good.
Wow. Hey, using legislation to prevent rather than react. Revolutionary. But yeah, I mean, this has been the thing over the last 20 years. When I was working with the regulator, we've just tried to get prevention. And the fact is that you show you can do prevention, and by doing it, there are consequences which are benefit the business, correct?
Exactly. And Deloitte's always do a study, don't they, where they give the stats of like, if you invest X amount of pounds per employee, you get a return on investment. So even for those businesses who aren't as compassionate and care more about money, it's a financial incentive as well. So you've got both sides of the coin. It's going to benefit the business financially, and it's also going to benefit the entire workforce and the culture. So for me, it's a bit of a no-brainer, and I can't really understand why businesses don't prioritize it. I still don't get it. And maybe they're not my audience, because, at Thrive, we work with progressive leaders. And so it's great to work with businesses who are always thinking about what else can they do, rather than me having to persuade them to care. So it's interesting, I suppose that's the space that I'm in. Whereas I appreciate there are a lot of businesses who don't do anything at all. And if you tell them you've got a mental health problem, they'll go, oh, should we sack that person? Because I've worked in firms where I've been asked to do that before. And it's not a nice position to be put in as a lawyer as well, to be told to, help terminate someone because of an illness or because of, whatever characteristic they might have. And so, yeah, I do think the type of work that we do now gives us the opportunity to work with more people and be more innovative and creative in this space. It's fun.
And the interesting thing is, so in Australia, they just brought out legislation on psychosocial risk. The EU potentially doing something as well. Well, I guess we have to catch up. We're in a catch-up position, which is interesting, because traditionally we've always been in the forward seat on this. But yeah, so it's fascinating. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. I listened to your ADHD chatter podcast, so I'm making a plug for it here. Really go and have a if you want to have a real insight about a personal level and a professional level of what ADHD does, then completely recommend Jodie's chat, which was recently, and I may even put it in our. Yeah, we can share it in the LinkedIn and that. So, but you're very open, Jodie, about it, and I just wanted to. Is that just something that's instinctively come out of the experience, or have you consciously made a decision today? I want to change people's perspective on it.
I think it's a couple of things. I think I actually struggle with oversharing. So I think I overshare because of the ADHD. That's a trait. It's kind of having a filter doesn't always apply to me. So I don't think it does. It doesn't come. It's not difficult for me to share, but sometimes it is. So it's weird. It's like there's an element of what I share is I suppose the things I feel comfortable sharing. So like the reason for my breakdown, or like how I got PTSD, things like that. I don't go into loads of detail on that because I feel less safe sharing that. And I think that's really important when you if you get into a space where you want to share, understanding what your triggers are and what your boundaries are and what you feel safe sharing. So when I first was diagnosed with ADHD 3 years ago, I wasn't really sure what that meant, and there wasn't really a lot of information out there. And so because I'd had a really positive experience sharing my mental ill health, I applied the same principle there and thought, well, actually, my mental health is intrinsically linked with ADHD. So there's so many areas that are so intersectional that it's really hard to go, oh, well, that was definitely ADHD, or that was definitely PTSD, or that was definitely insomnia. So it's really hard to identify that. And so I thought it was important to share the whole journey. And the first part of the journey was the breakdown, then understanding the ADHD diagnosis. And so there was that piece. And then also, I suppose, because I'm a lawyer and I know what the legal rights are, and it's actually an area that I specialise in. And I've always specialised in the area of disability discrimination. Maybe that was my calling before I qualified as a lawyer. And I worked at Bradford Law Centre and set up a discrimination project when the Equality Act came out. And I went around the country training people on the Equality Act before I'd even qualified. So I've obviously had this passion for a really long time. But then throughout the process, kind of understanding myself more and through therapy, and now I'm on what I call my unmasking journey, where I'm letting my kind of barriers down around how I have to behave like this because I'm a lawyer. I have to behave like this because I'm a lawyer. That mindset, and especially because I trained at the bar and it's a very traditional route. I've realised how much I've masked. When I looked at the ADHD diagnosis and what my mum said about how I behaved as a child, she was like, you weren't sociable, you were really quiet, you didn't want to do anything. Like, everyone thinks I'm super, super confident. And I suppose to an extent I am, but actually there's a real introvert in me so I have a really small social battery. And I'm learning this, that actually I was doing things because I thought I had to do it, like going to certain events or doing things in a certain way. And so sharing that journey, I just think is helpful for me, but it's also helpful for others. And I had recently the medication issue, and I can't tell you how many people reached out to me because I shared that I was struggling. They were like, oh my God, it's not just me. I was really panicking. And so, I don't know. I just think that's how I've kind of built the firm and my personal brand, is by being authentic and being vulnerable. And so to stay true to myself, I want to continue doing that. And that means sharing the highs and the lows. And sometimes it's really, really crap, and sometimes it's really, really good. And there's lots of bits in the middle. And I think it's important to share all of that, not just the highs.
Sometimes you get a text from someone in New York saying, are you in New York? Should we go to the museum? And not.
Yeah, well, I took myself to New York on my own, and I was like roaming around. And then, we ended up, because we couldn't find a time to chat in Yorkshire, we decided to meet in New York.
As you do. And one thing, last thing, in your openness, have other leaders been open, have come to you and said, look, actually I need to be more open about my own diagnosis, I'd be interested? Or is that still an area we still have to get leaders to drop their mask, to go and say, I'm vulnerable, but I'm also authentic at the same time?
Yeah, I think there's a mixed bag, to be honest. I have had a lot of people approach me and say, thanks for being so vulnerable and open. That's made me feel less vulnerable when being open. So I'm able to do that in my own way. And that's why the This Is Me campaign is helpful, because it shows people, it's a free campaign. I can give you the details, but essentially just allows people to share their story safely and gives them a guide on how to do that. And that's why I like This Is Me, because it creates a framework for organizations to do this safely. And it doesn't have to be that people have to share on a video. It can be that they might do a social media post, or they might just do it internally as a blog or a podcast. And it might just be something really small. It might be something really big. It's about finding, that the way that you feel the safest to share. And the more that you share, the more that you get used to it. But then some people say the more that I share, the more triggering I find it. So I've done it enough now and I don't want to do it anymore. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. But certainly we're seeing some leaders going, actually, this is better. But actually seeing people who aren't leaders as well go, I'm going to take the lead from the bottom up or from the middle up, and go, I'm just I'm a manager, or I'm a PA, or whatever it is, and going, actually, I can affect change in this way. So yes, I think it does require leaders to take the lead, but I also think by sharing your story and other people seeing it anyway, it encourages them to do the same in their social circles.
Yeah, and what was really interesting, we were at a conference together, and one of your staff was sat with you and was telling her story, and it was touching because I could see you were drawn to her because she's one of your staff, and you look at, and it was just, but she felt confident and comfortable, and that's what she said, to bring it to work and to say, I think that's an incredible legacy, isn't it?
It is. And that's the first time we've ever spoken together on stage. So ACAS approached me because they'd heard about the stuff that I've been doing, and they said, would one of your team want to share their story, or would you like to share your story? And I said, I've shared mine quite a lot. Let me see if Alicia will share her story. And actually, that was the first time she's ever shared it on stage. And I was really touched. Like, I could feel myself welling up because I know the impact that I've had on her in the sense of what she tells me, but hearing her say that on stage was just so moving, because the reason I set the firm up was that I wanted to create a safe space for people to thrive. That's what I wanted. So hearing her do that on the stage and knowing that, she's really happy and can comfortably do that now, and seeing the difference in her from when she joined us 4 years ago, it's just like a completely different person. And yeah, that for me was just such an amazing moment to go, oh my God, that's one of my staff. And I've not paid her to say that. I didn't know what she was going to say. And it was just such a nice thing to witness. And I just suppose, like, I've trained as a coach to basically continue helping her on her journey, because we've built such a good rapport now. We're kind of on this amazing journey together, and she's just doing really, really well and being really honest about her struggles, and that's it's just really nice, and I'm really proud of her for doing that, and I'm proud of the opportunities that she's been given to be able to, like, the platform to be able to share that as an associate.
Yeah, and it was amazing to watch from the audience, but yeah, and I can confirm you were welling up, and I as I was, because it was it is a beautiful thing when people talk like that, and this is the reason we do what we do, don't we? What we need, just before we finish, we normally have a one takeaway for the audience that you could give them as a one takeaway of advice. What would that be?
Advice to, shall I aim it at managers or just generally?
Managers or if you're an entrepreneur, whichever. What would be that one thing that you think people can do about this on mental health?
So I suppose in workplaces, the one thing that you can do is just get the data and speak to your employees. I think so often what we do is we just assume what people need. And I think for me, the one thing that I've noticed is so important is communication and understanding what people actually need. Because as soon as we know that, we can help people. People feel heard, people feel valued, they feel seen, rather than putting tick box initiatives in place that make people feel as though their thoughts and their suggestions are just not valid. So I don't know if that's one or several, but it falls within one.
No, that falls within one. We'll give you that. So, well, thank Jodie. It's been an absolute buzz to be able to have you on the podcast and to hear your story and to learn. I know your story anyway. I just want more people to realise that actually you can be a good boss, and that has real significant changes to you and to your workforce. So with that, I'm going to close down the podcast and remind everyone you can listen to this podcast on multiple platforms, and also you will be able to follow us on LinkedIn. We're both on there, and also on YouTube. So with that, I'm now going to say goodbye and leave it for Jodie to say goodbye as well.
Thank you so much. Bye.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.